Hey everyone, welcome to Amanda's Book Corner. I'm Amanda, and in this video, I'm going to recommend a bunch of different books that are set in Paris. If you've been following along this year, I have a reading challenge, and each month has a different theme. The theme for April is to read books set in Paris, hence this list. And there is a reason I chose this theme. Selfishly, most of the themes for my reading challenge this year are based on the many books that are cluttering up my TBR. And one thing I noticed is that I have a lot of books on my shelves that are set in Paris. Some of these books have been on my shelves for years, and yet there's also books that are set in Paris coming out all the time, and I'm just drowning in books set in Paris, and so I thought I'm going to try to really catch up on my Paris set books, and April is the month we're doing this. So if you'd like to participate in my reading challenge, April is all about Paris, and to help you out, here are 20 or maybe even more book recommendations for books that are set in Paris. I'll start off by recommending some books that I've actually read before that are set in Paris, and then I'll go into the many books on my shelves right now that I plan to read. And finally, I'll end with a few more books that are coming out this year that I'm looking forward to and also would like to read, even if I don't get to them in April. The first book I'd like to recommend is called Moonlight Over Paris by Jennifer Robson. I read this book a few years ago, probably 2015 or 16, I can't remember exactly when. And at the time, I didn't realize it was actually the second or third in a series, and I just went right into it. I loved it, by the way. Although, now that I know that there are other books in the series, I think I'd like to go back and read those books before getting to this one and rereading it. But in any case, this book is set in 1924. It's shortly after the Great War, and this woman goes to Paris, and while she's there, she really works on learning to paint and improving her art. It's also a little bit of a love story. I thought it was really sweet, and I love getting to know these different characters in this kind of bohemian time in Paris's history. Last year, I read a book called A Witch in Time by Constance Sayers. I really love this one. This is her debut novel, and I actually have another book on this list that she wrote that's also set in Paris, which I'll get to in a little bit. But I read this one, and I really enjoyed it. Part of the book is set in Paris, although not all of it. But this book has to do with kind of reincarnation, and there's this woman in the 2010s who starts to realize that she has been reincarnated a few times now. Her first incarnation was in France in the late 1800s, and that's where the Paris connection comes in. There are also different incarnations of her that are set in the 1920s and then in the 1970s, and now here she is in the 2010s. So this book was really interesting. I loved it. I love how it has all these different settings and has to do with different types of themes like music and Hollywood and painting. This is one that you might want to look up the content warnings for, but I thought it was a really fascinating and fun book. I gave this one 5 stars, and so I definitely recommend this one. Last fall, I read The Madwoman's Ball by Victoria Mass. This book is translated from French. It was originally published in France before it came out in English last year. And this one is a very short novel, only about 200 pages. It's set in Paris, and it's about a woman who gets put into an insane asylum. And it has a lot of themes of feminism and how men have been so horrible to women over the centuries. It has to do with religion and medicine, and it's a really sparse but very thought-provoking book. Also, I just want to mention that there is a movie adaptation of it, which I saw. The movie and the book are a little bit different from each other. I would say it's good to both read the book and watch the movie because you'll get a little bit something different from each of them. But in any case, I definitely recommend this in whichever format you decide to engage with it in. And my final book that I've actually read before is The Bad Girl by Mario Vargas Llosa. I read this one a couple of months ago. It's about a Peruvian who leaves Peru and ends up going to Paris. That was his whole goal. And it spans a few decades from the 1950s into the 1980s. It's about this guy and his weird on-again, off-again relationship with the bad girl from the title, and how she goes through these different personal reinventions and how she's dragging him into all of these kind of messed up scenarios. And meanwhile, he's really just trying to find some peace and happiness with her, even though she's making that quite difficult. I thought this is a very interesting and thought-provoking novel, and most of it is set in Paris, although it's also set partially in Peru, England, and Japan, and Spain. Alright, now let's get to the many books on my TBR that I plan to read, and I think they look good, so maybe you'll want to read them too. First up is Paris by Edward Rutherford. This is one of the books that's been on my TBR for the longest. I think I've had this book since 2015, and it's one of a few books that I've had for many years that have just been staring at me being like, will you read me already? And I keep saying yes, but I don't know when. Part of the reason is that this book is pretty long. You can't see how thick it is. It's over 800 pages, and that's kind of a commitment. I know I can read 800 pages, but it just feels like a lot. But this book looks really interesting. It's set in Paris and it spans several centuries from the 1200s or 1300s all the way to now. It has this extensive family tree and it follows these different characters through time, which I think looks really interesting. It looks like it offers a lot of different snapshots of Paris through time and the different kinds of events that are happening through it through history. So I think this one looks really good. It is a commitment, 800 pages. I promise I'll get to it someday. I'm not getting rid of it until I've read it. This author also has other books that are set in different cities or countries, and they seem to be really about this setting, so I think that's really interesting. So assuming that I read this and like it, I do want to go back and read some of his other books that have come out. Next up is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This book came out about a year and a half ago, and I've heard wonderful things about it ever since it came out. It's about a woman, Addie LaRue, who in 1714, she kind of makes a deal and ends up becoming immortal, but she's doomed to be forgotten by everyone who meets her, which I think is kind of a sad and lonely existence to have, especially if you are going to live forever. So this book looks really interesting, and kind of like the one I just mentioned with Paris, the book Paris, this one also spans centuries, and I think it looks interesting how you get a view of Paris through time and the different situations and events and conflicts that happen during these hundreds of years. So I'm excited to read this one. I've heard mostly good things about it, and I'm definitely intrigued by the plot, so we'll see how it goes. Another book I've had on my shelf for a few years is called Enchanté by Gita Trellis. I think this is the only YA novel on my list, but it looks really interesting. And by the way, this book originally came out as Enchanté, although it's since been republished as All That Glitters. And it has a sequel called Everything That Burns, which is also known as Liberté, depending on where it's published. So it has a couple names for both books. A little bit confusing, but the book looks really interesting. It's about a teenager and a younger sister. They're both orphans. It's 1789, and they're living on the streets. And this girl has a magical ability to turn scraps of metal into coins, and this is the only way that they're surviving. But then one day, they get invited to go live in the palace, and she has to put on this ruse and convince people of their identity, even though it's all false and based on her magic. So this book looks really, really interesting. I really want to read this one. It's kind of a longer book, and it has a sequel, so I'm not sure if I'll get to it this month, but I do want to get to it sometime in the next year or so. And it just looks like a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to read it. Another one that I picked up fairly recently is called Crossings by Alex Landdragon. And this book looks really interesting, not only in terms of the story that it has, but also in terms of the way that you actually read this book. If you look at the description, it says that you can read the book either straight through like a normal novel, or you can follow an alternate route, which is marked in the pages, and read the chapters in a kind of different order than what makes sense conventionally, and you'll get a very different story out of it. So I don't really know what that means, but it sounds like a book that I might need to read twice to get the two different effects. It has to do with murder and also follows 3 very different storylines, and it looks really interesting, pretty complex, and I'm definitely excited to read this one. And I'm not sure if I'm going to read it straight through or the alternate route first, and then when I'll go back and read the other format, but either way, this is a book that definitely intrigues me. For some historical romance, might I recommend The Brightest Star in Paris by Diana Biller. I should mention, by the way, that this is actually the sequel to a different book called The Widow of Rose House, which I haven't read, and this one's not set in Paris, this one's set in England as far as I can tell. But I do want to read this one, so I can then read this one. So I'm not sure when that'll happen, but it definitely looks really cute. It's set in the late 1870s and has to do with a ballerina who needs to repair her reputation, and the doctor who wants to help her out after years apart. So it looks like a second chances romance, and it looks really cute, and I definitely want to read this one. But not until I read the other one first. I need to try to start reading series in order again and stop reading them out of order like I've been doing lately. Another book that's been on my shelf for a little while is called To Capture What We Cannot Keep by Beatrice Collin. This book is set in the 1880s, and it has to do with a young widow and her relationship with the guy who built the Eiffel Tower. So this book looks really interesting, and it's based in actual history, which I find fascinating. I don't really know much about the building of the Eiffel Tower, but it's definitely something I'd like to learn more about, and fiction can be a fun way to get to know about history. So I definitely look forward to this one. It's been sitting on my shelf for a little while, but it is a pretty short novel, only about 300 pages, I think. So this is one that I do hope to get to. I already mentioned Constance Sayers, but she has another book called The Ladies of the Secret Circus, which I'm really excited to read. This one is set in 1925 and 2014. In 1925, we meet a young woman who is in a very secret circus, and we follow her relationship with a painter. There's a painter in the first book too, so I think this author likes painters. Later in 2014, we meet a young woman whose fiancé disappears on their wedding day. And while she goes searching for answers, she finds out that there might be a curse in her family history, and the curse might explain what happened to her fiancé. This book looks really fascinating, and I like the dual timeline that Constance Sayers is doing again. I really find circuses and curses and magic and painting and all this stuff really interesting. And so this one includes a lot of things that I am already drawn to in general, so I'm very excited to read this one. I think I'll read this one first this month, but we'll see how my life goes. Set just years later in 1927 is The Paris Hours by Alex George. I got this book 2 years ago from Book of the Month, and I've been planning to read it. It's a short novel, only just under 300 pages actually, and it's set over the course of one day in 1927, and it follows these 4 different people as their lives draw closer and closer together until an unexpected climax towards the end of the book. I don't know much more about the book than that, to be honest, but it does mention other famous people like Gertrude Stein and Ernest Hemingway, and these 4 ordinary people and how their lives might all interconnect. So this book looks fascinating and like a quick read, so I do hope to get to this one. For 3 years, I've had this book, The Age of Light by Whitney Scherer. This book starts in the late 1920s and goes through World War II. It's about a woman who wants to be more than just a model. She wants to be the one taking the photographs. I think this is really interesting how it follows a young woman who's kind of redefining the roles that women can have and how they can be more than just the one who is perceived as just beautiful or the muse, and they can be the one that really creates the art. And I think that sounds like a very feminist tale. So I've had this book since 2019, and one of my goals this year is to read all of the remaining Book of the Month books I got in 2019. So this is one of like 6 or 7 books that I really want to get to this year. So this is kind of near the top of my list of books that I need to read this month. In the same camp of Book of the Month books that I got in 2019 that I need to finish this year is this one, The Flight Portfolio by Julie Oringer. This is another long book that's a little bit intimidating for me. It's almost 600 pages long, but it's set in World War II, and it's about a man who goes above and beyond in rescuing people and getting them out of war-torn Europe and into the United States where they'll be safe. This book has high stakes, and I think it also has a love story, which I think is a gay love story. I'm not exactly sure, but in any case, I'm really excited to read this one, and despite its long length, I do definitely need to get to it this month. So this is another one that you can expect to see my review of soon, I hope. A book that came out a few years ago, but I got more recently, is called Goodbye Paris by Anstey Harris. This book looks really cute. It's under 300 pages, and so it's a pretty quick read, I think. It's about a woman with a violin shop, and she gets her heart broken, and it takes some unlikely characters to help her mend her heart and find her inner music again. I love any book that has to do with music, and I like how this one focuses on violin specifically. So this one looks like a really cute and sweet book, and I'm really excited to read this one. I should also note that this is one of only a few contemporary books on this list, so if you want something that's a little bit more modern, this might be a book that you'll enjoy. I think I will anyway. My newest book is The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. Now this is the only thriller on the list. I did enjoy Lucy Foley's previous 2 books. I know that people either love or hate her stories because of the unlikable characters, but I personally don't mind if they're unlikable. I still really enjoyed the novels. And so I have really high hopes for this one. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's about a woman who goes to Paris because her brother seems to be missing, and while she's there, she finds that the people that live in his building are a little bit suspicious. And so we get these different perspectives. It has multiple POVs, just like her other 2 books did, and it looks like a fun mystery kind of thriller. I'm very excited to read this one, and like I said, this is the only mystery thriller that's on this list here. If you know more thrillers that are set in Paris, let me know. One book that I have as an audiobook that I plan to listen to this month is called Paris is Always a Good Idea by Jen McKinley. This book came out a couple of years ago. It's about a woman who 7 years ago, she went on a European trip, which sounds fabulous. I wish I could do that. And since then, she's gone through a lot of big life changes. Her mother died, her sister has gotten married twice, and her dad has just said that he's going to remarry now. So she realizes that her life has kind of been on pause for several years now, and she decides to go to Europe and kind of rediscover herself. She decides to do this by finding different men that she had known in Europe and pursue kind of second chance relationship with each of them. One of them is in Ireland, one of them is in Italy, and one of them is in France. And so this one looks like a really cute and fun book. It's a book that falls into the categories of romance and women's fiction, and it looks like a delightful and sweet story, so I'm excited to listen to it this month. Alright, and I'm going to mention 3 books that are not out yet, but I do plan to get when they come out later this year. So coming out later this month, on April 19th, is End of the World House by Adrienne Kelt. This book is about these 2 women who go on a trip to Paris, and they go into the Louvre, and while they're there, they meet a man. But then, in a kind of Groundhog Day sort of thing, they start reliving the same day again and again and again, and they don't know how to get out of this museum and how to go back to normal life and move on to the next day. And there's also a little bit of a mystery that they need to go through. So I guess I lied when I said Paris Apartment was the only mystery. This one's kind of a mystery too. But this one looks really interesting and kind of unlike most of the other books on this list. And it comes out this month, and so if you get it in time, you could read it for the April Reading Challenge. But of course, you don't have to read books just according to a reading challenge, whether it's mine or anyone else's. This is a book that looks fascinating, and I do plan to get it once it's out. Another book that I'm really excited for is called A Caribbean Heiress in Paris by Adriana Herrera. It's the first in her new Las Leonas series, which I think is going to be 3 books. This book is a historical romance set in the late 1880s, and it follows a young woman who leaves her home in Santo Domingo and she goes to Paris. And while she's there, she meets a Scottish man, and it looks like a really fun romance between these two who might seem so unalike. And there may or may not be a marriage of convenience between these two, which is always a fun trope in my opinion. I do like marriage of conveniences. So I'm really excited for this book. It doesn't come out until May 31st, and I know that's after my reading challenge. I'm hoping I can get an arc of it before then, but even if I don't, I'll be reading it as soon as it comes out. It'll also fit for a June theme, which is to read Caribbean books. So regardless of whether I read it in April or June, I will be reading it very soon. And the final book I want to mention here is called Mademoiselle Revolution by Zoe Sivak. This doesn't come out until August 2nd, and so I know that's much later than the challenge, but I don't care. I'm really excited to read this one. This book is set in the late 1970s, and it follows this woman who is a mulatta. She's the daughter of a rich planter and enslaved woman, and she ends up going to Paris and falling into this relationship with some people, and she has to decide whether she wants to help this empire continue rising, even though it makes innocent people suffer, or whether she wants to find another path, even if it means danger for herself. So this book looks really fascinating, and I definitely do plan to read it once it's out. I know it doesn't come out until August, but I do plan to read it this year once it's out. So that is my list of 20 or so books set in Paris, most of them on my shelf, some that I read, some that I plan to get in the near future. I know there are many, many more books that are set in Paris that I could have recommended. I can think of probably 10 or 20 more just off the top of my head that I'm aware of. I have to say, I do remember a time when I went to a bookstore and I looked at their featured books shelf, and literally half the books on the shelf had the name Paris or a picture of the Eiffel Tower on the cover. And I was like, wow, Paris is a really popular destination for books. Maybe a little bit too popular. Not that I'm complaining, I would love to go to Paris. I've never been there. I've had 2 layovers there, but they don't really count. But I would love to go to Paris, and until I get to do that in real life, I'll be doing that through these books that I recommended. But I'll show some other books on the screen right here so you can see some other books that are set in Paris if you want to look at even more recommendations. Can't describe them here because this video would be way too long, but there are plenty of options besides what I mentioned here. And if you have any books that you would like to recommend that are set in Paris that I didn't mention but definitely need to be on my radar or other people's radar, please mention them in the comments below. I would love to know what other Parisian books are out there and what you recommend. And do let me know if you participate in my reading challenge. Again, the April reading challenge is to read books set in Paris. I'll be reading it, and I'll be putting out my book reviews of the books I do read for this challenge. And if you read books set in Paris too, let me know what you read and what you thought of them. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And to make sure you don't miss any more of my videos, please ring the bell to get all my notifications. I put out about 2 to 3 book review videos every week, as well as 1 to 2 videos like this one, including vlogs and listicles. So thanks for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!